Thank you, everybody, today for coming to the conference. Our next talk from Eric Shumake, or is it Shumake? Shumake. Thank you very much for coming. He is going to talk with us about the DNA of UI, 3 ways feature, function, priority lists improve your product design. Eric has over 2 decades of experience in UX research, strategy, design, and education, noted throughout his career for exceptional empathy, acumen, and effectiveness. He has worked with brands and agencies such as Procter & Gamble, Capital Group, Johnson & Johnson, Mars Wrigley, AccuView, Ubisoft, the Integer Group, the Creative Group, Omnicom, Safani, Vardis, and TBWA. He has taught at Naropa University and Rocky Mountain of Art and Design, and recently mentored at the MIT Hacking Healthcare Hackathon, with teams winning first and second place in their respective categories. Oh, woo, woo. All right, now that I hyped you up, the floor is yours, Eric. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Randy. Great to be here. Excited to speak at the conference. This is a very short window here to present, and so I presented one of the briefest yet highest impact processes that I know of, which is putting together a feature function priority list. And so I'm assured that the slide is sharing on the screen there. And so some of you may have read this from the intro to the presentation. Can you write out all the features and functions of your digital product in a simple ordered list? And I make the bold claim that if you can't, or if one can't, then one may not have optimally viable product yet. So across a lot of different areas, not all of which are mentioned here, but competitive research, concept testing, efficient design workflows, creating a simple prioritized list of what your product has, the content, and what it does, its functionality, is the perfect filter for stakeholder alignment. That's an additional benefit internally of the process. Deceptively simple, the process is one of the highest ROI strategic activities any product team can conduct. I sincerely believe that. But it is the trick is in the deceptively simple part. So what it is, basic description, it's a ordered list of all the UI content and functional affordances in any digital product. While it sounds simple, this lives in what I claim to be a rather sparsely populated area of the overall cognitive map. And so what I mean by that is it's very reductive and minimal in nature. And so analytically, it makes sense for a lot of the kind of reductive or more logical thinking modalities. But then it's really difficult to see that as a product, right? And then from the designer, the more creative or sort of global thinking modality, it's far too minimal to even be useful, either in a starting point for design or as a basis of consensus. And so it's where those sort of leave people's grasp of what's plausible is where the value of it gets lost and where the value of it resides. The strength is in unifying the two cognitive modalities in one simple framework so that everybody is aligned. And therefore, it's not as simple as it seems, because getting a product reduced, to a simple ordered list, can take a long time. There's a great quote by Pascal, I believe. I don't know if anybody is old enough to remember the programming language, but the mathematician Pascal, in one of his correspondences, wrote something to the effect of, "Forgive this correspondence for being so long, I lack the time to make it brief." So making something very, very efficient can often take more time than not. But what I submit is that if you keep to a very simple process, it keeps the decisions very simple. So here's a quick example of it, and there are much more robust examples, but this is taking just a tablet view of CNN, breaking down the major sort of order of the content blocks, and then within the content block here, primary navigation. There are some sub elements. So blocking out the space in the order it takes visually. And I find that looking at things either in tablet or mobile view helps really streamline the linear aspect of that feature function priority. So if you're to look at the whole desktop view of CNN, it has a more robust nature. It has multiple columns. It has some different element shapes. But the fundamental order of what's presented is consistent throughout. If you reduce it to a simple list, it's just when they make the decision to prioritize the content. So the simpler the view, I know mobile first was a mantra for a while. I still think that there's something so reductive about mobile. It has to make sense for mobile and of course all other viewports. But mobile people, they don't have time for anything other than what's next, right? And so this breaks it down very simply. You can even go as far as to do eye tracking tests, and examine a page and really get some verification there. But generally in sort of cultures from I guess basically the Western European or sort of Roman canon, reading from top left to right and downward, the F shape does still show up fairly consistently in those heat maps. So you can scan it by an F shape on those larger ones, or as I said, I really prefer going into the mobile view. And then that is reduced. Still, we have primary navigation being kind of scanned here, and then breaking down at the next, sort of part of the process into the actual names of the elements. But it takes entirely the visual aspect out of it, the design aspect out of it, and gets it down to the fundamental DNA as an analogy of what makes up that product. And if it can't be done with just words and no images, the value is in doing it with just words. And designers find this very useful when delivered to design from. But in reducing their own designs to this, it's very uncomfortable because a lot of those decisions have to be made in reverse. And I'm happy to open up to any questions as we go on this. There's a lot more robust examples, but really for the scope of what we're doing today, I wanted to keep it to something very, very simple just to illustrate the concept. This has a lot of benefits. So competitive research, it's a cornerstone of product design. And so what this can do is, let's say you look at, you're wanting to design or analyze news sites. And so what you can do is very quickly, very simply, you could look at, the top 5, either for, revenue or for traffic or for membership or influence, depending on what metric you want to rate them by, your top 5 competitors, and very simply make a list of each one and what they think is most important first. So the current best practices, you can actually take you can almost sort of for free kind of pirate all of the research, all of the business decisions, all of the iterations of the best in the business, really simply into, okay, boom, here's what's happening. This is the current best practice. This is how people are delivering. And then that sets the baseline where you can know whether you can deliver either at parity, which is a great business strategy right now, whether you can improve on that, which is another, strategy, business strategy of find something that's working well and do it better, meet a market where it is and improve on it. Or you could innovate and disrupt. You could say, look, everybody's really thinking of it this way, and we could go ahead and do it this way, and really change the way that entire industry is functioning. And that's, again, from this simple, low cost, very easy to do type of research. And another thing I want to throw in is it's very low bias. You have to look into your selection criterion. You do have to look into how it's evaluated and coded. It's nice to get maybe one person evaluating is good, 3 to 5 is better, because then you can actually even get out some of that bias from the reviewer. But it in and of itself, it has a lot of safeguards because the order is the order and the elements are the elements, the functions are the functions. So, really reverse engineering something that exists is a low bias form of research that can be done by almost any stakeholder internally. So designers can do it, product managers can do it, of course, researchers can do it, almost anybody can do it. And it also gets us out of the, I use Reddit and XYZ claim of a stakeholder. We can then say, well, let's look at Reddit and okay, they put this element here. And, then we can start to look at why they might do that. It controls the conversation. It keeps it focused on some specifics. Another thing that's great is for concept testing. So before you even get in front of stakeholders, before you recruit, before you invest, concept testing can be run against the mental model established. So the competitive research phase, prior to qualitative testing, you can workshop some concepts and say, okay, here's our concept. How does this relate, to these other strategies? Everybody else is leading with a logo. What if we lead with the profile? Obviously, not a great idea because people want to know where they are when they're on a website, which is why everybody starts with the logo and sort of the brand equity. But you can ask questions like that and get some pretty quick answers, right? It shows where the concept can improve upon competition by saying, look, nobody is doing this. We're looking at everybody. And, we see this demand for XYZ existing organically in the ecosystem, but no other platform is meeting it. Maybe it's a social element, right? So people see something like, there's an interest group that's on Facebook that's something that's, organically, people are building it themselves, right? There's no product, so they're building it themselves. And that shows that there's something that could be met by the market and brought in, right? So, hey, everybody's doing it this way. Nobody's bringing in this social aspect. Let's beat them there. And so the opportunities for innovation as well, not necessarily just improving on the competition, but maybe even fundamentally changing the game by saying, hey, we can take out, they go A, B, C, D, and we can go right from A to D. On this, and people just want to get to the affordance, right? So that trend happened a bit with real estate sites where they went, pretty much to more like a search engine model of an affordance where you get in and it just says, hey, what neighborhood are you looking for? As opposed to trying to pull information, personal information or data capture. It moves from meeting the business need in that way to meeting the user need. And that innovation was very popular because people just want to get on the site, and start looking at houses. And the design workflows are greatly enhanced. So, we've all given a creative brief, first, getting the product brief, moving that into a creative brief for the designers. And, a lot of times there's too much open space is the feedback from designers, because there can be a lot of sort of vague product requirements, things that are, ambiguous terms, and other types of other elements like that. And what this does is it really, really simply says, okay, look, here's what we want. We've looked at it. Here's the order that they need to be in. There's still plenty of room for expression for designers, but whenever they have to make a material decision that they would normally have to go back to stakeholders, well, hey, is this more important or is this more important? All of those decisions of hieratic importance are predetermined, and so the alignment is simplified, right? If people say, hey, is this more important or not, you can go down a whole rabbit hole of saying, oh, well, let's move that to the left, or let's make it purple, or whatever else. But it's the core thing of whether it's a content that does something important, right? Lets people, it informs people, inspires, motivates, moves emotions, and then a way to take action on that, right? Whatever that function might be, whether it's, something simple as send an email, all the way up to, a purchase funnel. And it's important to note that this exists prior to the digital space. An analog kind of analogy would be, let's say the old, I don't know if anybody's seen these, but it used to be, get piano lessons, and there'd be a flyer up and it'd have little things you could tear off, right? With the phone number on it. And so, it would have the frequency of the location, and then it would have the interactive, it would have the content, maybe a headline, an image, and then you tear off that number to save for later, and that would be the functionality, right? So it works whether digital or analog. But another great thing is the process is documented in one simple pass-through of that feature function priority list. And the decisions that need to be made to change priorities are also greatly clarified, focused, and ultimately simplified by looking at a list of what needs to be done. So I think I wanted to leave some time for questions, and I'm happy to go back to the image here and go through a bit more. So just real quick, that's been me talking for a while. Are there any thoughts on that? Any questions?
All right, folks. We have been looking at a checklist, an alternative way to look at the layout of the design of different systems. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to put them in the chat or the QA. I am monitoring those. I'm sorry for any folks who were not getting a transcription in the beginning of this. I'm not entirely sure what happened with our live transcriber, but I did turn on auto caption, so I hope that helps somewhat.
And if not, I can go a little bit into how these might work comparatively. I can go into an abstracted and applied example of how powerful this can be, even when dealing with expert constituencies. In the abstract, there was some research on the structure of some medical reports, and the competitive research revealed that that there were a lot of standard conventions like logo placement, identifying maybe a sub branding, with the company that was doing the testing, and then a very similar order in the readings from the test, some of the recommendations. Although some had a 2-column format, some had more of a kind of a traditional vertical linear format. But one of the things that showed up too was that a physician's signature was required. And so very quickly in, looking at all of this, what I mentioned was, that you get all the R&D, all the research, best practices of the companies. And so what I recommended in reviewing this was that we examine adding the physician signature. And the team had at the time said that they had reviewed it. It wasn't necessary in our case. I recommended that, we go back and double check that. And indeed, it did come back with the team that that was an important clarification and something that was added. I never would have had externally the subject matter expertise to say, hey, this is something that's going to be very valuable. But I don't need to, right? Looking at the competition, if the competition is doing that, why are they doing that? There's probably an established precedent and need. It doesn't mean that it would have to end up there, but it did mean that it was a good opportunity to say, hey, let's double check that. There have been some others, in competitive research that show up that show some pretty big holes, right? That one company is very different. And that they're not competing well in a certain sector, but that this one element is working well. And so could that element be combined with the best practices of the others and turned into a new hybrid, right? So you can use it for ideating, you can use it for, checking, for, harvesting the best practices that are demonstrated. Obviously, there's some companies out there that don't do well, and you don't want to necessarily copy them, but it still is very important in sharing the baseline, the mental model of what people who have been visiting websites within that sector or vertical are expecting. And that's a big thing. Like we see a lot of times in e-commerce, if it doesn't work like Amazon, then people start trusting that platform less. So then all of a sudden parity to get to the Amazon model of one click, I don't want to get my card out and enter the data, and all of the other things that they do very subtly to make you want to purchase there. Those need to be emulated, and that minimum standard really needs to be hit, because if you don't achieve parity, on some of the basics, people will go elsewhere, and that's unfortunate because obviously the competition, especially some of the companies with the largest kind of share of voice in the market, have an advantage, but this is a real great way to democratize that, right? They can't stop you from looking at their site, seeing what they're doing, and taking that knowledge. So to me, it's a real, I'm looking for a better metaphor than the Achilles heel, but it's a great way to get scrappy and get some traction against the some of the more established, economically established, players in the market. The biggest concern is that, or challenges in implementing this I've found are with designers. Oftentimes, designers will check out right when it gets to the good part, right when you get to the list. The gray box wireframes is engaging, and they feel like that's almost painfully reductive enough. And then, moving it to a list really just gets entirely out of the hemispheric processing that they're accustomed to. And So I try to sell it to designers by getting them in a situation where I provide them a list like this to design from, because then it's like Christmas. Oh, okay, cool. Primary logo, got it. And then that gap isn't there. They jump the gap that for them is too easy to explain. It's almost unconscious. But if you have them reverse engineering these, their designs or other designs, they'll often check out right when it goes entirely verbal. So that's an area to watch there. And then the other thing is, if you show a feature function list to a stakeholder as a designer or as a design or product team, they might be like, "What are you doing? This is a list. This is ridiculous. We need to see, we need to see some shapes, right?" And that again is saying, no, we need alignment right here on the kind of the meta concept of the features, the functions, and the elements. And I find the DNA works really well as a kind of a handle to explain it, right? It's a very, very simple code, but then it unpacks in all of the sort of, robust glory of nature. And, it's the other thing is that the artifacts hold up really well if you revisit them. Some things change, but the feature function priorities often will remain very similar, and innovations will stand out a lot because, while some of the styling can change, that the primary psychological content generally remains the same, because people at the end of the day are people. So I hope this was exciting and engaging for folks. And please do follow up if you want a copy of the deck or any questions. Yes, please. Randy, I think you might be muted.
Hello. Yes,
Oh,
we've got some questions in the chat.
wonderful.
All right. So Aditya says, how do you effectively identify how to hybridize different elements versus making them separate elements on a list?
Good question. And it's a little bit subjective. So these could be blocked like this, or sometimes I've actually gone and made the squares to each element. So each of these would get, the logo itself would get a square and it would say logo, live TV. Here for this concept, I wanted to keep it simple and just keep it in these large kind of ordered blocks. So that is somewhat subjective. And I do want to say there are a lot of subjective aspects to this. And so those are the areas to watch for bias, because obviously in choosing what sites we look for, what viewport, what devices, all of those are opportunities to make a mistake. And, I think, but overall, it's a pretty safe process, right? So there are some arbitrary elements in grouping those. I would say when in doubt, go more granular. If there's a sort of a pull to, locate some of the, let's say it's important to locate the scale and spatial placement of a logo comparatively, then you're definitely going to want to map that out, right? Is that helpful?
As far as I can tell, yes. Marianne has a question. How would you go about doing the competitive analysis in Excel?
Excel is an interesting one because people either people have emotional how do we say, associations with Excel. So I will often try to just get this in plain text on a doc, because everybody can jump into a Word doc. Those are fairly ubiquitous. And despite a lot of neurodiversity, a commonality still ends up being written language. And so that's just because it's a required touch point for almost all facets of shared work in conventional contexts. Does that make sense?
Yeah. We also have another question that says, from Marianne saying, is there any further recommended reading on this matter?
So this is something that I've come up with on my own. I've run into a number of designers, generally very good ones or experienced ones who've done this themselves too. Like, I just got to put this all on a list and then I can design. I love it when I see that. I'm actually planning on putting together, I think, a small ebook on this. So I'd be happy to chat further, but as far as I know, there's not anything specific out there. This is a fairly proprietary modality. but I claim not to have discovered it. It exists organically and well in nature. So I just want to share it and advocate it. Like if I had to sit down and get a report to somebody on research of like what should we do next, this is my go-to, and it's scalable, it's reliable, and it's basically just take all the. There's a modality out there called see-do, right? What do I see on the page and what do I do on the page? So I'd recommend looking up the see-do modality because it has a lot of parallels, right? The feature and function, feature is what I see, function is what I do. So I think that that's been fairly well developed, but I've been kind of looking for a chance to share this just because I see how well it works. And it's always just been my go-to, and I only had a half hour, so I wanted to easy to communicate because I've been accused of over-explaining things.
All right. Well, if you ever do make your ebook, just let me know. I'd be happy to help publicize that through uxstars.com and all.
Yeah.
I've got another question for you myself.
Yes.
Sites like CNN, right? They have to advertise.
Yes.
And in your nav here, of course, I don't see an advertisement, but as a user, I see that sometimes the advertisement headlines can confuse the page. And also another pet peeve of mine is that on certain news sites, they'll start with something that appears to be the video applicable to the news story. And it's just like some robot did a keyword search and found like a video from as close as they could find to it. Do you have any thoughts on how that relates to this thing? Because it's like you have your perfect little structure here, and then like other things like creep in.
Absolutely. And there's a trend, calling those sort of dark patterns. I don't think that's a very useful name personally. I kind of use the descriptor greedy patterns. It doesn't quite have the same ring in the market to it, but really it's when the business interests are put ahead of the user interests. And a lot of times those are on revenue driven actions such as clicks. And so, making it so that you click on a different video to promote that video, in a way that seems like it could have been your mistake, right? I don't like that. It happens to me too. And it's like,
You watch an advertisement and then above it shows you the title, and then it shows you a video that has nothing to do with like the news story.
And aggregators will do that as well too, right? So they'll do something that's a related topic, right, to get traffic to another video. So those are the first order of business is to stay in business, and so on one analysis, a lot of times designers and certainly researchers and UX folks are advocating for the user and saying, these upsell insertions are not in the user's best interest, right? But the company staying in business to provide the service is, right? So where's the ultimate trade-off in whether that's good or bad, right? The metric that was pointed out was, hey, there's a lot of negative reviews coming in, this XYZ app is ad heavy, right? And a case I would make is, well, the overwhelming sentiment is people not complaining about that and actually subscribing and upselling to the premium valuation, which is really the point of the transaction. So, while there's a vocal, group that complains about it, there's also a larger group that takes the value transaction. And so the idea is to look at the overall equation and say, is it just that folks would like the freemium, which is reasonable, but also not realistic in the business model, or does it work, and is there always some noise about the idea of an upsell in capitalism? I personally that's me being objective and being using the sort of science that I try to recommend. My personal opinion is that money is a form of disease process, and we for it, but that's part of what makes me good at understanding how it moves as well.
Yeah, I mean, I have nothing against ads. It's usually in how they're implemented.
Yes.
It like, to me, a lot of UX is, am I respecting the user with what I'm doing right now? Right? Like, you can talk to your friends about your business and get them to hire you for things, but you can do so respectfully, and so can websites.
Absolutely. And I think an insight then from your cogent comment that it's conspicuously absent from the CNN site is that they got the message. And even though they have some of those banner ads that open up still, when I was doing that, it actually, the only banner is just its own sort of, replacement for the TV chyron of, what's breaking news now. So you actually don't feel like you're being sold to right on that page. And that actually probably, that consideration in comparison with the competition probably does a lot, right? Okay, hey, actually, I'm not just being sold to, they're letting me read the news before, right? And they're providing value first, because we know that's a primary revenue driver is, they land on the homepage. If you can get a click out of them, or if you can get an impression track to them, then that's revenue. And so maybe they're trying to step away from that above the fold, as it were, on that kind of homepage first view, precisely because of that. I noticed amusingly that Fox News had a legal disclaimer was its top banner, and I will just leave that at that.
I'll check it out later.
I looked at a few for analysis, and I thought CNN was fairly objective. So
Gotcha.
how are
All right. Any more questions, folks? Yeah, I feel like I could talk to you for hours over coffee, but I want to make sure we leave room for all these attendees that we have in case they have any questions.
Absolutely. And I hope I got to the essence of each question that came through. I hope I heard it right and answered in the right direction. I guess just to run through again, just really the competitive research, it gets the best practices out there in the baseline, the mental model. A great way this can be taken further, for example, is looking at conventions. One analysis I did recently was for medical alert software. So on the physician side, what were the interfaces using to to show what was critical, what was the palette, what was the nomenclature, and there was a lot of consistency and some interesting variety. There was one that used purple that was nice that we brought in for critical. There was one that, I am not kidding, said panic. and it was great, which always reminds me of Douglas Adams' Don't Panic. And with an exclamation point. So what we were able to do is then go through and say, all right, most people are expecting that, as we thought, red means alert, and green means good. And then, yellow was the most common cautionary, or yellow, because of contrast issues, actually went to this sort of something between orange and yellow because it was slightly darker. And then purple was not commonly used, but in testing actually really related well to something above red. And so that worked well. And so we were able to look at what people who had been in the space before were expecting. We were able to meet that expectation, but also then use some interesting insights to innovate.
All right.
How are we on time? Because I am happy to riff as long as I'm not.
Good. Yeah, I've been also looking at the quality of the auto transcription versus the live transcriptionist, which we typically have for these events. And if you said innovation and it said enemy, so a little bit different in the meeting. It's doing a quasi decent job, but it really every once in a while really changes things up a little.
Nice. Well, the signal to noise ratio, or whatever that is, I do tend to mumble a bit, so I will try to more clearly.
Yeah, I'd hate for people to see enemy when you meant innovation. So
innovation is the enemy.
Go back to the old ways. All right. We do have a link here. Somebody's suggesting people check out darkpatterns.org. Yeah.
Yes, that's a good collection of those sites. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that the dark patterns, I think that's when you feel like the website's trying to manipulate you to achieve its goals that might be in contrast to your own. And I think that is different than advertising. You know, people expect to see ads. You know, they know there's some social contract or expectation that maybe this website wants to sell me some things. I think dark patterns are next level, trying to pull the wool over somebody's eyes typically.
Right, where people are left with the feeling of being had, right? Like,
Hmm.
you know, hey, look, like we all saw that. Like, why, right? Or the comments that are like, no, I don't like saving money. Like, don't like, you know, you know, it's like, yes, subscribe, or sort of a psychologically negative phrasing of the decision the business doesn't want.
Hmm.
And all of those are things that we wouldn't want out of a person if we were interacting with them live, and we certainly don't want it out of an unaccountable company. But what can be done about them? Obviously, I think documenting them. It would be interesting. There are a lot of frameworks and rubrics out there. I think it'd be interesting. There's the sort of net promoter score. What would the manipulative pattern score be, right? And that could be something where apples to apples, we could say, hey, this website is 32% of the time you know violating these established kind of principles of ethical patterns.
Hmm.
There's not, I don't know if there's money in it per se, but there's so it would have to be a altruistic, maybe a collective project. But it would be an interesting way to, it's similar to how like the Baymard Institute will come up with their, e-commerce, heuristics principles, and then say, okay, there's 23% adherence here or whatever else. They're focused strictly on e-commerce. Whereas I think it'd be interesting to say, where are the ethics of this? Because something I've been saying for years is ethics are the new money. Money is a very bad idea. It's a bad way for information and thermodynamic systems to interact. And my example there is, if you look at thermodynamic systems are just any way energy gets distributed, right? So it could be how Walmart fills their warehouses and gets goods to people's homes, right? They did that better than the previous model, which was either local, family-owned stores or department stores that were national. And they actually won on the information game. They found what to buy and what to purchase when better than anybody else. If you look at the story of why Walmart took over, their information system outperformed the other information systems of competing thermodynamic systems. What happens then is what governs the information systems is ethical systems, right? Which is, either what's most profitable, which is not what many people would describe as an ethical system, but that's what governs it, right? All the way to, is this good for society, right? Is it right to have a corporation making billions in profits, and their workers are on public welfare, right? Is that ethical? And then do people shop there because of that or not? Or do they just go for, I have to shop there because of price? But what's interesting then is Amazon is competing now and trying to get the, consumer channel information system and conversion, right? Their UX is really an example of an information system moving into meeting the customer where they're at. And so that's why Amazon has been, combating, right? But then there's all that real estate that Walmart owns, and so they're going to compete within the rules that civilization allows them to. But I think it's a bit of a scam. I mean, the 5 of the 10 wealthiest folks' last name is Walton, while their workers are on, public assistance. So. I'm getting a little political there, and I apologize for that. But that will happen if you talk to me long enough. But what I would like to say is that what we really need to do is innovate on the ethical systems and make them competitive and perform superior to the competing information systems that they govern, and then the meek shall inherit the earth. To borrow an old metaphor.
Yeah, you're reminding me a little bit of Alan Cooper. Do you know Alan?
Not personally, but I wish I did. And yes, I like him because he agrees with me.
Yeah, he recently had a had an event, and I just think that you guys would just get along so well. Yeah.
Yes. What was it? Some quotes from that were, "You care about ethics, but your boss doesn't."
Ah, yes.
That was a keeper. And that doesn't mean, what that means is that people, higher up get more pressure, which leads to another tangential theory that I advocate, which is that exposure to power is like exposure to radiation. Exposure
Mm,
to radiation disrupts our, unravels our DNA, and harms our bodies. Exposure to power really has been shown time and again to erode empathy and compassion. And that is probably one most valuable thing that someone has, right? And so, looking at regulating exposure to power, and mapping it as a potential pathology rather than something that everybody wants to do or be, or right. I think we might have that backwards.
takes us all the way back to Lord of the Rings, and too much wearing of that one ring, and you got to have some hobbits out there. So,
It really
all
was.
right.
It really was Gollum's story. Cool.
All right. Well, thank you, folks, and thank you for all your input. Hope I meet you again someday, Eric. I'm sure we could talk a lot about a lot of things. Thank you, everybody. This is interesting. Something definitely I'll be looking at as I diagnose different user interfaces and look for room for improvement in them. All right. Adios, folks.